Welcome back, cave dwellers. It's time to talk dirty. Having sorted the technical difficulties in part 2, it's now time to clean this old girl up, and I'll be approaching it in 3 stages. The first is of course the dirtied and yellow plastics. Can we restore it to anywhere near the original Amiga colour? The second is that thin, cheap and nasty RF shielding inside the case. Do we even need it? And if so, what options do we have for restoring it? And finally, we'll look at the system board, which, on the face of it, appears to be fine. But dig a little deeper and, sure enough, some work is required here also. And of course, if all goes to plan, you'll get to see everything put back together, and we can assess if this restoration has been a success or not. Step 1 then, with the plastics, and the inside of the case, having not been exposed to UV light, gives us a good indication of the colour we're trying to achieve. But before we can do anything, we need to take off that surface dirt and grime that's built up over the years. So let's slip into the shower with our Amiga 500. A combination of elbow grease and car shampoo is used to lift the dirt without adding extra salts to the machine, as you would if you used standard dishwashing liquid. Next, it's a familiar sight to anyone who watches these series. Yes, it's time for our baking powder for fluffy muffins. Used as a very gentle abrasive, it's the perfect way to lift those more stubborn stains and get into those tiny pits of dirt without causing damage to the system. It is, however, still an abrasive, so you do need to be careful that you don't go overboard with it. It's also great for getting into those harder to reach places, expanding and fizzing in any nooks and crannies, which you can then fish out with a toothbrush to get the last of the dirt. If you'd like to see a more in-depth video about restoring yellowed plastics, then check out this link that will pop up at the top of the screen here now, where you'll find an episode in which I cover it with more detail, restoring an old Tandy TRS-80. The cleaning continues, and as we work our way around the system, we remove both permanent marker pen from the bottom of the machine, and we clean up those rubber feet to get them looking like new again. Another advantage to using the baking soda as opposed to harsher chemicals is that we don't risk unwanted chemical reactions with the peroxide that's used in the retrobrighting process next. If we're just using water and baking soda, which we rinse off afterwards, then we're not going to have any unexpected side effects when it comes to retrobrighting. I did, however, have to use a little bit of alcohol here to remove one of the more stubborn security stickers from an old warranty label. So I made sure that was all washed off before we moved on to the next stage. Our case was finally all cleaned up, and it was time to then move on to retrobrighting using some peroxide. I'm using my favoured cream peroxide, which is B Blonde. It's available at the supermarket. I find this one is nice and easy to spread across the machine to make sure that you get an even layer, which is an important step in ensuring that you get an even finish. You'll find lots of stories on YouTube of marbling caused by retrobrighting, and an uneven application can be one of the causes. Cling film is applied to stop the peroxide from drying out while it's out in the sun. I like to ensure that the cling film is bunched up underneath the machine rather than on top of the machine, again in an attempt to avoid marbling by ensuring that we get an even application of sunlight across the whole area. Having followed that process for both the top and the bottom of the machine, we put it out into the Great British sunshine. Yes, there was some today, thankfully, and the next time you see that, it will be on our finished computer. Let's move on to the next step. On then to the RF shield. This serves two functions in the Amiga. Take a look at this archive video of an unboxed Amiga that I used to have many years ago. You'll notice the ports at the back are very shiny, and that is the bottom half of the RF shield showing through, so it does serve an aesthetic purpose as well as a shielding purpose. Compare that now to the bottom half of my RF shield, and you can see where we have a problem. That tarnished metal will make the rear of the Amiga quite unsightly. We also have another common problem with this shielding, which is rust. And it's one of the reasons many people choose to simply remove the top half of the RF shielding. I haven't seen anything conclusive to say that this is a good or a bad option, but many people use their Amigas just fine without it. I decided to try and remove the rust in the gentlest way I could think, using fresh lemon juice mixed into a paste with the baking powder. The perfect way, of course, to restore this shielding would be to have it replated professionally. I did of course get a quote for that, and it came in at a ridiculous £288. So if you happen to be an Amiga fan with access to a CNC machine, if you're interested in running off a few hundred stainless steel replicas of the RF shielding, then please put me first on the list to buy one. The lemon paste did its job well, and most of the surface rust came off, although a little bit of wire wool was needed for some of the more stubborn parts. But at the end of the scrubbing I had rust-free RF shielding. We did still need to improve the visible part of that shielding, so I thought to myself, am I the last romantic millennial? No, I thought let's respray this, at least to give us a consistent finish at the rear of the case and on those visible parts, so it's just a bit nicer to look at. So a layer of primer went down and then a couple of layers of silver. I also sprayed a little bit of anti-rust paint on the rust on the inside of the RF shielding just to slow down the oxidization process and re-rusting, but ultimately it's a cheap piece of metal, it's going to fall apart eventually, and hopefully we can find a permanent replacement in the near future that the whole community can benefit from. We're looking at you, Mr. CNC machine. On to the system board then, and humour me on this one. The Signetic CPU is a genuine part that Commodore used, but I just wanted a Motorola branded one in there, so I swapped them out. Completely unnecessary, but I just wanted it that way. Right, let's get on to the cleaning. It's a fairly straightforward process. I cut a paintbrush to a more useful shape so that I could get into all the corners. And then I just gave the board a dry brush to remove any easy to remove debris. And then isopropyl alcohol was used. This one is 99% proof. And I just worked my way around the board in small sections because it does evaporate fairly quickly. Spraying it onto the board and then cleaning it up again with that paintbrush. And having completed one pass of the board with the paintbrush, I performed I guess a fingertip clean across the whole board using cotton buds and the alcohol again, so this thing was pretty spotless by the time I'd finished with it. Last but not least, I wanted to rinse the board down, and the last thing you want on your board is limescale from using tap water. So I'm using this. It's deionized water, easily available from your local car shop, and I just gave the board a rinse down to make sure all of the alcohol was off. Oh, and I should also mention that I popped all of the custom chips out and cleaned the contacts on them. But I think you've seen enough cleaning for one day. What should happen now is that I should showcase the Amiga to you in its finished form. But we have a problem. Despite my optimism earlier when I was retrobrighting, the Great British Summertime made a comeback. So as soon as that sun comes back out, we'll finish the retrobrighting and you'll get your grand finale of our refurbished Amiga 500. It's been 30 years in the making, so I'm sure we can wait just a couple more days. Take care, cave dwellers. If you enjoyed this video, why not consider taking a moment to subscribe to my channel, watch some of these other videos, or even become a patron and help support the channel. Thanks again for watching.